last week where we considered this in more detail, so the timing just wasn't working. So I do have a presentation which I was going to share, but I'm just mindful of time, and I could pull out a few of the key points for noting now and then maybe share the.
Well, that'd be fine. Why don't you do that?
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So as we discussed in our committee, this was the first national staff survey that we did as an integrated care board. It was done in November last year. So the context of when it was done is kind of important because obviously we were just in the transitional period. So it's just to be noted really. We had a pretty good response rate, 69.4, which compared favourably across the other ICBs. So we compared, our group is, there are 42 ICBs in total, but our group in terms of staff survey was 37, so presumably some people didn't do it. As a whole organisation, we scored above average on every single one of the themes. So it's set out against the people promise themes in the NHS, so it is kind of very NHS focused in that respect. So we felt that was a really positive start given the context in which the survey was carried out. When we got the detail, we do have the detail sitting below that, we recognise there's differential experiences for colleagues across the patch. And because of that, our approach has been to do some more local action planning and engagement on those things so that we can try and make sure that we address the more differential experiences that our workforce are having. Things that we scored particularly well on and in line with the best performing ICBs were around flexibility, flexible working, and health and wellbeing provision. And then some of the areas in which we really need to focus, and we talked about in the People, Workforce and Culture Committee, were around some of the workforce race equality and workforce disability equality scheme indicators, which show that some of our workforce are experiencing discrimination, and particularly in terms of race discrimination and sexual orientation, are significantly higher than the comparator benchmark. So one of the actions coming out of our discussion in the committee are really that we need to take those and focus on those as part of our overall action planning. Morale, stress and burnout, again, are some areas in which we need to look, and we did have a higher number of people say that they would leave the organisation. So I think broadly we have a really positive first staff survey. We have got work to do, understandably, and we're really embracing that. We'll have a overarching organisational themes, but they will be supplemented by really detailed, each executive director, their team, what their action planning is, and then we can bring back the updates here. I guess it's just a note, this will be repeated in November this year, and again we'll be in another transitional organisational period. So it is very challenging for staff. So the most important thing for us to do is close that feedback loop on a regular basis. You tell us, we do something about it wherever we possibly can. So I think that was the focus of our discussion in the committee.
I think it's worth mentioning about, we also touched on psychological safety and the moral and social contract that we have with our staff. So what other kind of initiatives, thoughts, support are we putting in place? What's already here? What do we need to add more to? I think there is an element of that as well, is that we were quite conscious. I think the survey also highlighted to us that while overall the numbers look really good, once you get into those differentials, we've got a piece of work to do. But we were also mindful of the fact that we're on that journey and we're doing the work. So that was also a positive. I think the telling thing is going to be, as Christine is saying, so when that next staff survey comes, still bearing in mind it's a transitional period again, where are the differences what are they going to highlight for us? So it's kind of watch this space.
Yeah, I guess the worry I would have, just looking at this objectively, is we'll be in the next 10 staff surveys and we'll be in the throes of a really difficult discussion about redundancy. Let's be brutally frank. Next agenda item. I just think we all have to be honest with each other about that. And and we can, and I know we want to handle that really well and handle it sensitively. However we handle it, it's very difficult in my experience for people to feel good when that is taking place.
I think that's what we recognised in the committee, that there is no two ways about it. It's going to be difficult. It's going to hit people hard. But mitigating that is what can we demonstrate in our behaviours and attitude towards staff. And as Christine was saying, closing that feedback loop, because if we don't get that bit right, that's the least we can do.
I agree. No, I think that's right. I think we all have to be honest with each other, to it's going to be a really difficult time to be having that staff survey. Nothing wrong with it. It's what it is, but it will be what it is. Could you share the slide deck with everybody,
Yes.
Christine, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Grand, thank you. Running cost.
Thank you, Chair. I shall be concise. We do have a bit of business to do on this one, so I will need to get support for this process. So I just need to go through a couple of slides just explaining how we're.
What he was saying there is you can't totally shut me up, Chair. Just remind the board that's what he was saying.
Interpret as you wish, Chair. So Gavin's asked me to be the SRO for this project, but myself, Lee and Christine are working very closely, sort of a team of 3 leading on this, and we've come up with this project. I'll just go straight into the slides. So Gavin did talk through the challenge in his opening presentation, but basically, just to recap, it is 20%, then 10%, and then we have a 5% pay award as well. But what we've made a decision is we want to do one exercise because we don't want to do stuff that going to that. You could do it over a couple of years, but I think all the other ICSs are in a similar space. Is one exercise, and our headline figure that we're working to is 30% requirement, and then a 5% pay award, so 35% is the number we're using in general conversation. So 35% is the challenge, and one exercise. So in terms of introduction and purpose, just summarising that, we've got an organisational review, and we're going to launch it in March, which we've talked about. And the ambition is we're going to have to take costs out of our organisation for March 2024 to meet the target. That's cost in terms of staff and in terms of non-pay as well. Non-pay is mostly buildings in our organisation. Next slide, Mark, straight through. This just sets out how we're approaching it from a project initiation document point of view. So we set out the scope, we'll set out our objectives, principles and parameters, which is what we need to just all be comfortable with today. And then it will do a proper process. So it doesn't bring individuals' viewpoints into it. It's a proper, well-structured process with good governance surrounding it. So I'll go straight into the next slide, Mark, if that's okay. So this is the scope and objectives. I'll just go through this a little bit slower. So we're going to deliver the organisational review, design and change with a target of 35% against, or we're doing one exercise to be completed by March 24. We have the 35% applies to what we call running costs. So our organisation, we have roughly 800 staff, and they're split between programme costs and running costs. It's roughly half and half in terms of how it's split. The definition which Lee might be telling me with is roughly, if you support directly delivery of frontline services, you can be classed as programme, but otherwise you should assume everyone else is in running costs, basically. So things people who wouldn't be in running costs would be things like pharmacists who work in general practice, continuing healthcare nurses who do care packages. So we do have staff who do those sort of things, but it's about half and half. But what we've decided is rather than split our staff into two and argue about who's in what definition, everyone is in scope. So even if you're in programme costs, which isn't subject to if we've got duplication or we've got our resources in the wrong place or it's not equitable between separate teams, we want to tackle it all in one exercise. And there's a recognition our history is we had 4 organisations that came into one with an employment guarantee, and there's probably some imperfections around our structures which we want to iron out as part of this. The slide always puts, but it obviously affects the board, it affects executives, everybody. It's not just our staff, everybody in the organisation comes under this review. So we're going to look at function by function and work through the executive team will take responsibility. I've got a diagram which just shows how that reports through which shows it more clearly. So that's it. In terms of objectives, I think carried out most of these through. We'll go through. I've got a Gantt chart which shows the timescales for the design period. We'll need to develop a management for change business case. Now, this is really important. Is as part of this, we have to, assuming as part of this we have voluntary and compulsory exits from the organisation, we will have to construct a business case to NHS England Treasury and people to go through. So we'll have to have a very clear rationale, a very clear payback about why it's good for the public purse, and we'll have to have a full business case to do this. So we won't be just a paper coming to board. This will be a full business case that, quite frankly, has to satisfy this board and satisfy Treasury and NHS England. We deliver a support to an organisation, Treasury. Christine's absolutely every point in this. We're trying to support our staff through this. You know, we're having fortnightly meetings where we're going through, just reminding staff about what support available, taking feedback. We had one yesterday, didn't we? There's a real live dialogue and conversation with staff about how we can do this and be as interactive and understanding as possible as an employer. recognising there will have to probably be some voluntary and compulsory exits. Next slide, Mark. So this is just the principles we've set out for our project. So a focus on support all our people to be key to the process, obviously absolutely in line with our values and behaviours. The entire process will be carried out in partnership with our trade union colleagues. Again, I'll just explain, we've set up a stakeholder meeting, which is part of our process. I've got other diagrams, so I'll just go through that when we get to that. The organisation will be to start from first principles. So the way we're approaching it is, what does our organisation need? We've got statutory duties. We know we've got 31 national must-be dones. Let's work out what the organisation needs to be successful and then do our structures based on that. All levels will be agreed, including board level, including programme costs and running costs. Increased controls on recruitment. So we have a panel now set in place, which is myself, Lee and Christine, and we'll review every single vacancy. We try not to recruit substantively unless it's absolutely essential going through. So what you'll see is if there are adverts coming out in our organisation, they tend to be time limited up to the end of March next year is pretty much a good rule of thumb. But obviously in exceptional circumstances, if the business absolutely requires something, we look at that. All efforts will be made to minimise compulsory redundancies. So the process will be, we'll do voluntary measures first and then compulsory measures to deal with what we can't do through voluntary. And to ensure we maintain a level of flexibility in our approach could the national requirements change. Specifically that, we talked about the Hewitt report earlier, that did suggest a lower level. We haven't seen any reaction to that, but we need to have a fluid process so we can react to national policy as and when. It could go up or down, I guess, couldn't it? Okay, next slide, Mark. Thanks. So cutting to the chase on this one, below ICB Executive, there's two boxes there. There's the ICB Executive Steering Group, whereas if you think it's myself, Lee, Christine and Sophia, our Programme Director, we come together weekly and oversee all the various work streams that are done. And then below that, there's the Organisational Review Stakeholder Group, which we bring in a wider section of staff, particularly staff side and trade unions. And we're trying to bring in our networks as well, aren't we? So we can make sure all staff are properly represented as we go through. And that's a fortnightly meeting where we just bring people absolutely up to speed with what we're doing and take their feedback on our approach. But the bottom line is, this isn't new governance. This all locks into ICB governance. There are two task and finish groups in my language. The ICB Executive is the ring holder for this, and our statutory committees will absolutely make the decisions. The two key ones will be the Remuneration Committee would have to sign off any voluntary or compulsory measures, and obviously the board will have to oversee, as we are doing today, the whole process and the management which the executives. So that's that. Mark, just move on to the next one. So again, this is the parameters for organisational design. It's obviously, I'll just quickly go through them. So we'll include all staff ensuring everyone's treated equally and all functions are reviewed. We'll support the delivery of our core purposes, strategic aims, statutory and mandated functions. Again, but this is about what business needs, not what individual directors need or anything else. This is about what the organisation needs. Obviously, place partnerships are absolutely important, and the principle of maintaining our place structures is something that's essential to our design. Developed in conjunction with key stakeholders, including our workforce, that's the committee we've set up. It'll be affordable within the new running cost allowance. And just to give a picture of that, we're talking about going from a running cost allowance of just over 30 million to 20 million. That's the scale of what we're looking to do. So it's a really significant amount of resource we've got to take out of our organisation. Seek to deepen integration across health sectors, health and care. So most directors are working very much with partners. We've got some creative ideas about how to work differently, how to work more efficiently, not just in our organisation, but if we work differently with our providers, with our local authorities, they may well be part of our solutions and our provider networks as well. Seek to reduce or eliminate duplication. Again, because our history, we will have duplication of things that don't quite work as we wish. This is our chance to absolutely sort those issues out and make things equitable. And then the principle of subsidiarity, and that things should be done as locally as possible. Our local authority partners are particularly keen to see that in there, but it's very much sticking to our place principles that we wish local decisions to be made wherever possible, wherever it adds value. So there are parameters. Just one more thing. So this is just a Gantt chart. So basically what we're Yeah, so it's at the top, it's April to June. So we've got to do all that by the end of June. So that is extremely challenging, but to meet our requirement to do it once and by the end of March, we work through all the HR processes, business cases to treasury, 6 months consultation, all those things, we have to be coming to our July board with a proposed solution.
I agree. I think that's right, Chris. I don't think there's an option to do it any more slowly.
It does drain the colour from my cheeks when I think what's going to be involved in doing that. I totally agree. It's absolutely what we should be aiming for.
And the other thing that I think is a key principle, and I think you're right to have said it, is we can't do this in 2 goes. We can't have another go next year for the 10%. We need to get our organisation right-sized once, and then the people who are with us are with us long-term. Not, we'll have another go at it, and that's called an efficiency saving. That would be an awful thing to do. 30% scared for the daylights out of most of us. But actually to do it in 2 goes, I think would just utterly demoralise people. I think this is the right way to do it. Okay.
So just today, I just need board members to be comfortable with that approach. It's the right approach, and we've got the right principles, objectives, and scope. So that's the business we need to do today.
Any questions for people? And I noticed there's sort of 2 bits, two bits of of assurance, if I can call that. One is I'm expecting your committee to say this process is going okay. Okay, not to go through the detail, but to say to me, Piers, the process is fine. Secondly, the remuneration committee will have to consider all individual cases of both VR and compulsory redundancy. And they will be very detailed business cases because we know we'll have to get departmental sign-off. We raised a couple of times the issue of redundancy, help with redundancy costs. I am getting utterly stony silence from anywhere above them. It's not to say we won't keep raising it. Getting no sense of any support. We raised it again last Thursday, didn't we, Chris, with the regional office?
Yeah, I think that all the ICBs were raising it as an issue, but I think it was sort of mentioned that will be dealt with at a future date. It's sort of the response with no commitment.
No commitment.
No commitment at all.
Richard.
This is
Kevin. Sorry, Kevin.
question really. So I recognise that pace sometimes services you may. But the ICS obviously as a system is working in 4 places.
Yes.
And if you take what you might describe as core ICS functions that done one is called the ICS, there'll be a defined amount of that, and then there'll be functions which are done 4 times but in a slightly different way that reflect the places. So is this sort of intent to, if you like, describe the options there? Because if you were to allocate the resources to the 4 places that are place-based, the places themselves might have much more opportunity in terms of designing something that will work at the place for longer and be practical and be achievable. Because obviously that place, there is more, there's the resources that we have as providers and others to bring to the table where we can share, those running costs and operational issues. But it's time, isn't it? And you've got a limited amount of time.
Well, I think the answer is that's right. That's what we'd like to do, but we are limited in time. Christine.
Yeah, to just explain, the org design process that we've kicked off, which is the first sort of step of that, is we're going through what we're calling an opportunity matrix. So we're working through all of the list of the statutory functions, thinking about what we've done sometimes, thinking about what the opportunities might be. But we recognise that some of those opportunities might take us 3 to 5 years to implement. So some of these won't be able to be implemented. But I think it's really important that when we go into this, we're able to share a potential emerging vision for the future, so staff can see a direction of travel for something that might take us longer. So if we're talking about a shared service arrangement or an integration arrangement that we don't currently have, we're not going to be able to manage that level of change and transformation in this year. We wouldn't want to lose it, Richard, I think. But so what we're doing is that work now, and then we're all identifying what we're calling lines of inquiry that we can then come and engage with partners and our workforce on in more detail and say, is this really an opportunity? Let's look into it a bit more, think about the timeline. So that's really setting that out. So, and that's what we can provide to the committee to provide assurance. That will be our sort of decision-making tool, won't it? The parameters we set out for organisation sign what we'll test back against. To make sure that
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions we asked in the technology programme, which is getting to the savings, is the issue there. Why can't we just have it once? If we can't have it once, why twice?
No, I think that's right.
And I think that is what we're trying to do.
I think that's what we're trying to do. So, you know, if you take, we are absolutely committed to having strong place. That doesn't mean everything that exists in place today, at the scale it exists today, stays, does it? You know, we might say, actually, this thing we agreed in the beginning we do at place, we're going to do that in Century. It doesn't change the fact that we have a strong place. And that's the kind of, and then how do we work with our collaboratives and with place in a fundamentally different way that makes us more efficient? Would be the kind of stuff we have to do.
So, I mean, in terms of that analysis that Christine's just described, there'll be things that the ICB must do because it's a statutory responsibility that's got to rest with us. But I think the rest we're really interested in. Actually, are there functions that, you know, a local authority could do? Are there functions that sit with the ICB at the moment but could be led by the Acute Federation or the MHLDA Federation in a more cost-effective way? So I think we're really keen to have that conversation. I think one distinction I would make though is place isn't the ICB, place is the partnership, and you know, I think what we're committed to is continuing to really value that partnership and support that partnership to be successful. But that does mean to say that within the ICB, the infrastructure that we've got supporting place might be different, but place is still, you know, prime.
I've got Kevin and I've got Lee, and then Kevin.
Thanks, Jason. I think just coming on the tail end of Richard's observation, maybe there is a principle to be drawn out about where we can do it once and do it together.
Yeah.
That covers a multitude of sins, but the first of all, the approach is clear. Thank you, Chris. It's clear and scary in equal measure, I think, in terms of size of the challenge. But there is clearly the starting point is what we've got to do. Picking up Gavin's point, then what bits can we do with partners? But at some stage, there's going to be a judgment, isn't there, about what's going to be added value work, and it'd be interesting to understand not necessarily the criteria, but what's going to influence where we put any discretionary resource that we can't embed in partners, because you know it can't be down to the director that shouts the loudest.
No.
They're all capable of shouting by the sounds of it, but there needs to be something that defines where we target our discretionary resource that's remaining.
Yeah, I mean, can I be honest? The 30% reduction, I'm not sure how much discretionary resource we'll have.
And the answer may be academic.
It may be, but I agree with you. And in a sense, I think it's for the board as a whole to make those judgments.
And that was the follow-up.
Yeah.
At what point, given these terribly intense timescales, do we get some sense of actually we need to invest, for example, in engagement more so than here, or let's put all our eggs in the health and equalities basket? There needs to be a debate.
There does. And I think that has to come back to the board, and we might have to pull, given the timelines around this, we might have to pull together a meeting offline that says, this is an informal discussion on, right, here's what the organisation review looks like. Here's the thoughts. Are you all comfortable with this? Do you want to make any changes? Lee?
To answer your question, which the way I answer it is, I think realistically to a June deadline, we can get to a point whereby the work we did in the target operating model last year, we can revisit that and go, what should we do once versus what should we do in place? And I think we can describe that differently without the employment guarantee yoke we're carrying around. It's going to be tough, but I don't think we're going to get as far as going, and we've got a vibrant model for unifying financial management in Doncaster Place, which changes the way in which we deliver finances across those statutory organisations. I think there's a piece of work for us to do, gates inwards, for the ICB to say what we do once versus what we do 4 times, unshackled by the employment guarantee, which has got to derive an answer of 35% lighter. But what it can't do is sod up that next stage of integration that potentially comes next.
Yeah. So we've got to keep the ability to do that, because you're right, Richard, that's what we need to do together, don't we? Was anyone else?
It was me.
It was me. I'm sorry, but I thought it was on about
It's quite all right. So just a couple of things then. So I think it's really helpful to see system development in here as one of the sort of lenses through which we can see this, because I think if we weren't in the realms of management cost reduction and the time frame to work within that, probably some of the options that we'd get into would be part of how we would naturally develop anyway as a system. So, you know, part of the legislation was about supporting that deepening, wasn't it, of integration between health and social care. And actually I guess the main change within that was actually removing an organisation away from that to allow that to happen. So there is something about that. There is something about though, and I think your question, Pierce, is, you know, is it going well? I think there's some. I mean, in the baseline stuff, we are going to have to be really clear, aren't we, about what our responsibilities as an organisation are, and really understand them well, so we can flex them. Because actually, I think I think Kevin, to your point, it's about how comfortable will the Integrated Care Board itself feel about how far it is from some of these things that it might want to share with others. So I think, you know, we need to get into that space, don't we, really, really quickly. And I think that will be one of the tests of how robust we do this well, is actually that baseline assessment and baseline knowledge. But I'll leave it there, Pierce. But I think, you know, there is something about just reminding ourselves of those two things.
Well, I think Claire's point right. I think we need to report back to the full board on here's where we are on the organisational review and the key principles about, and are you all comfortable? Because these are the implications, not the detailed implications, but these are the implications. Are you comfortable? Yes or no, to allow us then to move on to, you know, formally making it happen. But I think what's obvious from this, so thank you, Chris, is this is not only demanding timeline, but this is going to be really challenging for us. A number of us didn't feel the lift and shift, the guarantee of job was the right thing to do. This always should have happened. But now we're doing it in a very time constricted way with a big number of attempts to it. Is the way I describe it. Which is not how you'd want to do this. Doesn't mean you don't think it's the right thing to do with it. Okay, thank you very much for that, really helpful. Can we move on to corporate assurance report?
We can, Chair. So, apologies for the scale of the papers. They're a function of there being a number of policies and a restatement of the scheme of reservation and delegation. So, first of all, just an apology because there's quite a lot of paper or screens, depending on how you look at it. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. The first is the board assurance framework continues to evolve and has been enhanced and is included within the document set. And we are making relatively good progress, including the view of our internal auditors on how it is firming up. I'm looking towards Lee, who can affirm that. The risk register is included, and we've highlighted the highest risks, and the mitigation is included in the pack. The register of interest, gifts and hospitality is published on the website, continues to be updated, and then the report sets out some significant corporate assurance work that is ongoing and represent thousands of hours of must be done stuff, including in the 9 months that we've been in operation, more than 250 freedom of information requests. All bar one has been responded to within the 20-day working day standard, which I think is something to celebrate, and we do share our thanks with our colleagues and teams. Two things I did just want to tease out. There are a number of information governance related policies that are included within the pack that have been through ICB governance. So they've been reviewed by the information governance group, which is chaired by our colleague guardian, Cathy Winfield, and our CIRO, Senior Information Risk Owner, Will Cleary-Gray, and they've been reviewed and supported by that group. They've been to the operational executive and supported. They've been through virtual review at the Audit and Risk Committee, and they're presented to the board for adoption. And so they're there within the pack. And then the necessary changes to the scheme reservation and delegations that are set out in the paper that's presented by Anthony around the pharmacy, optometry and dentistry delegation are reflected in the full sword, which is also presented in the pack for transparency. And so they're just recommended to the board for adoption. I've raced through that, yeah. So
You did, particularly one. Is that okay with everybody? Agree with that? Thank you. Cathy, serious violence duty. I would have called it the duty of serious violence, but something about this that makes the way that's described, as if I have a duty to committee about. Now, there are times, Kathy, when that does seem entirely appropriate.
Yeah.
Look,
So, just lost my connection, I'll talk through what I remember from what's in the paper. So, this really is for information. So, as part of the kind of national review from the sort of criminal justice system and national police commissioners, there's a new element of duty which came into force at the end of December. Thank you, David. That's a brilliant, glamorous assistant that came into. So we're informed of it in December. Came into being from the beginning of January. We've been working through that as a system, and this builds on kind of previous violence reduction policies to bring in domestic violence, violence against women, and other elements of acts that also link closely into safeguarding. South Yorkshire were one of the early implementers of the violence reduction units based on the level of serious violence that takes place across the system, which links back to the presentation we had first thing this morning. So each of the places already has well-established safety partnerships, which are kind of multi-agency, multi-partners. There's also a partnership approach committee across the whole of South Yorkshire and a violence reduction unit that sits underneath that with work across all partners. There's an executive board that was established some time ago that sits above the VRU. The health representation on that historically has been through NHS. We haven't necessarily had the feedback loop from that back into the system. As part of the new duty, the ICB has to have somebody on that board, so we're representative, so that we've got that sort of information in and out. Alan Windle, who's our chief nurse that works into Sheffield Place, is going to take that position for us as an ICB, as long as the board are comfortable with that. And we've agreed that we'll do sort of reporting and any themes through Quippy, and Alan brought a paper to the last Quippy.
okay, I was going to ask that, so that's going to go to Quippy.
Yeah. So that's all I was going to say.
That's fine.
Really, the information's there in the paper, Piers. I didn't want to take up a lot of.
No, that's really helpful. What I was just going to make sure is it came through somewhere. If it goes through to Quippy, I'm good. Okay, people comfortable with that? Thank you for that. We've now got a series of receipt of minutes, firstly of the place committees. I'm just going to say to anybody, if they've got any issues with them, either those bringing the agenda items or any members of the board, the place committees, is that all right? Q, the assurance committees. Anything? My assurance chairs, anything chairs want to raise? Hasn't been picked up. Okay, thank you for that. So they are noted. We then have questions from members of the public. Mark?
Do you mind pick this up, Chair?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. So we've had a question from Mr. Tim Buckle about lymphedema. That's not on the agenda today, so we'll provide him with a formal response. We've had a question from Nora Everett, who I think is joining us online today, just about suggesting a memorandum of understanding about people and communities. And that kind of links in with a question from Peter Deakin as well about the Start with People South Yorkshire strategy, which we are refreshing at the moment. So I think we can give assurance to both those people that the way we communicate and engage with our populations and communities is being approached in that way. Then we've got a question from Rachel Farmer, who again I think is online today. Rachel asks about about workforce, and I think there's a discussion that took place as part of the meeting today, so that'll be captured in the minutes. But she offers liaison workforce, the organisation to link in with the ICB. So I'll pass on those contact details. We've got Mr. Doug Wright here present. Mr. Wright submitted a couple of questions. And really, this probably ties into a question from Nora Everett as well. So Nora Everett asked about the change in the agenda around public questions and whether that's clear. Will we continue to post them on the website? And Mr. Wright asked about whether we'll include all questions in the minutes and in addition asks whether 10 minutes from 10 minutes on the agenda is enough for public questions. I think you had some views on that. Chair.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not, several things. One is, I'm not always sure this is the most perfect way of having an engagement with the public, which is questions at a public meeting. But I know a number of people want to make sure we have them, so that those questions are recorded. What I think might be helpful is if you and I, Andy, I'm very happy to arrange to see some of these individuals and say, can we talk about the best way to do it? I'm not sure we've got it right. Get that. We moved them to the end at the request of people who thought they should be. I think it's a danger that we do them too quickly at the end. Yeah. Actually, that doesn't feel right to me. But we were asked to move them to the end. So I guess what I'd quite like to do is arrange to see somebody who raise this question, maybe you and I, to say, what's a better way of doing this? Because I'm not sure we've got it right. But I've run a number of public meetings and it's always felt a slightly odd way of doing it because they're not, the meetings in public, they're not public meetings. But equally, I want to give members of the public the right to have their question seen, noted, and our answers seen and noted, which I recognise as part of the process. So the answer is, I don't think we've got it right. And let's try and think about a better way. But I do think, I know a number of people have said to me, but people like to have their question raised so they can follow up the answers. They can see whether we've been consistent over years. And I think that's a legitimate challenge. So I find I know we moved it at the end because people asked us. It feels to me like an afterthought. I think it would be better earlier. It's a very personal opinion, but it's not my view that counts. So, Andy, can you and I arrange to see people and talk about what would you like us to do? Because I'm actually up for doing it differently.
Absolutely. I'll reach out to those people and organise those meetings.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do that face to face or on Teams. Because I don't think we've got it right, is my summary of where we are. Is that okay?
Yeah.
That is the end of the meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry that we're at 13:05, which is a miserable failure on the part of the chair. So I apologise for that. And we have no part 2 meeting, no private discussion between the board. So we're finishing now. Is that okay? Look after yourselves, everybody. Safe home.